Hello, and welcome to Magic is Real, a podcast focused on the fascinating world of near-death experiences, spirit communication, and all things metaphysical and spiritual. The mission of this project is to share messages of hope and inspiration with others, and to spread the word that death is only an illusion. Thank you for being here with an open heart and mind. I wish you peace, light, and love always. Hello, Magic is Real listeners and family. I'm Shannon. I'm your host. Today, I have a very special guest today. His name is Kelvin Chin. He is the author of these books right here, which I have had time to read half of each of them. One of them is called Overcoming the Fear of Death, which I do really want to talk about, and also want to talk about this, but for different reasons. This is Marcus Aurelius Updated, and it's 21st Century Meditations on Living Life. Kevin is a public speaker. He is obviously an author. He is a meditation teacher. He has been meditating for over 50 years, even though he only looks like he's 50. And so I'm really excited to speak with him about his spiritual journey, about so many of his insights, and to talk a little bit about his book. So, Kel, thank you for being here. It's so nice to have you.
Yeah, great to be here with you, Shannon.
So great to be here with you. Now, I just want to say before we start that what I appreciate about each of these books, well, first of all, the fact that they are so easily digestible. So you can read, they're not pages and pages and pages. They are sort of short little essays. So they're, for me and my lifestyle, it really works because I can't necessarily read an entire chapter in one sitting, but they're little nuggets of wisdom and little ways. I've heard you say that you like to make the metaphysical, what was the word? More,
Yeah,
it's more
demys-
accessible.
demystify the
Demystify.
mystical.
That was the word.
Demystify the mystical. Yeah.
Yes, and I really also appreciate about overcoming the fear of death when you talk about how children, especially, and how we speak to children about death, um, and just really making this more of a public conversation. I really do want to get into that, but I really do want to hear first about you,
Hmm.
who you are. How did you find your way on this spiritual path? And I want to hear about what started you in meditation, all of it, anything that you would like to share.
Yeah. Well, I've been on the spiritual path for many thousands of years, it turns out, but I didn't know that for about the first 20 something years of my life. But this time around, I was born in Boston, grew up in the suburb of Boston. And actually, unbeknownst to me, spiritually, um, I was talking to invisible beings when I was 2 or 3 years old. And I didn't hear about this until I was a teenager, when some of my mother's sisters, my aunts, were teasing me about it. And like, yeah, Kel, you remember when you, and I didn't remember because they teased me about it when they were in high school, when I was 2 years old. And I probably blocked it because what happened when they brought it up when I was a teenager, I got pissed off. I felt like, where's that coming from? Frustration and annoyance with them. So evidently it started with me early, even though I didn't remember it until, well, they told me. But I learned to meditate. The first conscious act that I did was I learned to meditate when I was 19 years old. And I was really, really stressed out. I was desperate for something, and I did not know. It didn't do it for spirituality. I didn't know what spirituality was, other than I went to Protestant Sunday school because I was forced to by my parents, not because I wanted to. So that to me was like spirituality, I guess, religion, going to church. But I learned to meditate because I was very stressed out. Fast forward 6, 7 years later, my past life memories started opening up when I didn't even believe in reincarnation. It just spontaneously happened. And then another 10 years later, I started spontaneously communicating with the other side. In between there, like a year after I learned to meditate, um, I studied personally with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. He's the Indian guru who taught the Beatles to meditate. That's the way most people remember who he is. And then I studied personally again with him a couple of years later, became a TM teacher, a teacher of transcendental meditation, which is what he was teaching, what he was teaching around the world, and was an international leader with his organization for about 10 years, and then they went a different direction, and I decided to stay teaching meditation. So, yeah, that's kind of the big picture
Yeah.
view. Right.
Yeah, that I love the way that you condensed it because I'm sure there's so much within all of that. I
Mm.
also know that you had a near-death experience when you were 20 years old. However, that wasn't your first spiritual experience at all, which is why it's not something you really talk about a lot, I assume.
Yes.
Because and you can I won't put words in your mouth, but I just heard you say in another interview, um, and this was you were in the ocean. Is that what caused?
Yeah, I almost
Yeah.
drowned. Yeah, I almost drowned. I came really as close to drowning. As close to drowning as I've ever come, and probably as most people would ever come to drowning and still live, to tell about it. So, yeah, and it wasn't my first spiritual experience. Again, I wasn't defining my experience as spiritual at that point. They were just experiences. I didn't, it was like, oh, okay, my mind is it really is separate and distinct from my physical biological body. I'd have those experiences. I didn't consider that a spiritual experience. I just thought it was a natural experience because it was a natural side effect, really, or of my meditation that I had learned 2 years before I had that nearing drowning experience, you could call it. So I was very familiar with the separation of the mind and the body being separate and distinct from each other, obviously influencing each other, but not the same. So I was very familiar with that after a couple of years of meditating. And as I said, even in the middle of that 2 year period, I'd spent a month with Maharishi at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, Massachusetts, for a month in residence with him and about another 1,000 people on a teacher training course with him for a month. So the point is, I was immersed in meditation and experiencing myself, connecting with myself in all these different ways, etc. By the time that I had that almost drowning experience, it happened off of San Diego. The listeners who may know the area, it was off of Black's Beach, which is Torrey Pines State Park there. And I was, as you say, I was 20 years old, and I'd never been to the West Coast. I grew up in New England, so I'd never been in the ocean except for around Cape Cod. And so, yeah, rip current pulled me out in a matter of seconds. And a friend of mine who was a merchant seaman who, knows all about navigation in the oceans and this and that. He's on my nonprofit board now. I said, how far out was I? The 300-foot high cliffs were about 3 or 4 inches tall. He said, you were 1.7 miles out. So in a matter of, I don't know how many seconds, because I was panicking at the time, I wasn't counting seconds, I was pulled out by this body of water in the ocean. That's what a rip current is, for people who don't know. It's basically a river in the ocean. So you don't know how fast you're moving because the whole physical body around you is moving and you're just stationary in it. It's just like being in a car. You don't know how fast you're moving if your windows were blocked out and you couldn't see outside, how fast you won't buy stuff, because you're stationary inside your car. Your car is what's moving. So I was in a vehicle basically that was moving through the ocean really fast. It was a rip current, a river in the ocean. And so I panicked. I forgot all my Boy Scout training, which is you're supposed to swim at an angle so that maybe you increase the likelihood of getting out of the current. Of course, I panicked and I was swimming straight back into the current, and I get exhausted. I start going down, just like in the movies, you see the surface of the ocean going farther away. And I don't know, maybe it was 3 or 4 feet above me at that point. I was holding my breath, but I was so exhausted, I didn't know how long I could hold my breath. And then I saw that, and my mind popped out of my body. The only way I can describe it is I had this observation of myself, um, and knew what it was. It didn't surprise me because it was so familiar to, analogously, we'll say it wasn't exactly the same, but it was very analogous to experiences that I'd had probably hundreds of times by then in my meditations at different times. Not all the time in meditation, but sometimes. So it was very familiar to me. So I thought I recognized that. I was, oh no, I'm coming back in. And I went, I split second went back. I was out split second, and went back in. And it's interesting because in retrospect, I never talked about this really publicly until about 4 or 5 years ago, recently. And what I realized was my desire was what put me back into my body. That's how subtle free will and personal choice is just desire. So and boom, I'm back in my body, struggled at 3 or 4 feet to get to the surface because I was exhausted. There's no way if I had had what, many people, some of the listeners probably have, heard or seen YouTube videos, people talking about near-death experiences, and people go into this place of blissful, loving, peaceful, whatever place, and they're like, wow, this is amazing. Oh, it's full of light and all this stuff. And they get blown away by it because it's so new. It's an unusual experience for them. And they're there typically for at least many, many seconds and likely many minutes. And some people are there for hours. Some people have been there for days if they're in a coma, in a hospital having a near-death experience. If I'd been there, if I had been in that oh wow experience probably more than 10 or 15 seconds, I never would have struggled to get the 15 to 20 feet back up to the surface. No way. I would have drowned. So
Yeah.
I pulled myself up and I just took my time coming back. I just said, I'm taking my time. And for some reason, I must have been slightly out of the rip, or I was out of the rip current by then, because I swam in, and my friend who was on the beach there was nobody on the beach except the two of us. She said it took me about an hour, she's guessing, to swim back in. And I was exhausted. I passed out for 20, 30 minutes on the beach, just passed out.
Wow. And you had talked about the fact that you'd actually had other out of body experiences while meditating. And I want to delve into that a little. Do you remember the first time it happened, or was it more of a progression of every time you meditated, different sort of things happened?
It more of a progression, although I do remember the very first experience I had that I didn't know was kind of out of the body, because I never had experience. It's like,
Yeah.
if you don't have ever had an experience, you don't know. There's no, what I call, there's no as compared to what. It's just, it is just what it is, right? And so I didn't know, I wouldn't have called it an out of body experience, although now that I've had so many, I there was, oh, that happened the very first time I was instructed to meditate. That's what happened. But I wouldn't have called it that at the time. I would have said, I just felt incredibly peaceful, and I just felt this unusual. I would probably would have called it. I probably did call it, which I was talking to my friends afterwards. I just, man, I felt amazing. It was so unusual. I felt like, wow. That's probably how I described it.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. But now I realize that was the first time, I turned within, which is why I call what I teach now turning within meditation. But I turned within, and the first time I was taught, I went way in. It just
Yeah.
went way in, which is really, it's funny at this phrase out of body experience. It's really a very much, you're inside so and connected so deeply that it feels like you're out of your body. Now, sometimes people can experience, and I've had this experience where you do feel like you are out of your body. So that's where the term comes. But it's no different from the experience that many people have had, whether they meditate or not. You could have this experience because it's a natural experience. You could have had it sitting on a hillside, just spacing out, looking at the clouds go by and relaxing. It can happen anytime, but it's no different from the experience of being incredibly connected and within, except we call it out of body because we identify, I think this is my conjecture, I think is why we call it that, is because we identify ourselves with our body so much. So when somebody feels like they're out of their body, it's like, oh my God. But it's no different from people who have had the inner experience, right?
I love that perspective. I never thought of it that way. That's really interesting. I've said this on the show before, but I only recently had my first out of body experience through meditation, but it wasn't the out of body that people who have near death experiences say. It was as real as this. It was like you said, that makes so much more sense. It was, I saw a tunnel I did see a spinning tunnel. It wasn't a white light. It was like a tunnel that a chute, like I was kind of spiraling down it. And then all of a sudden I was in this vast space. And then I met the soul of somebody that I'm close with. And right after it happened, he texted and said, I just felt something energetic happen between us. And I was like, I think our souls just left our bodies. And I think that they ended up in the same place. And he saw the same things that I saw. But it was more of it wasn't as real as I'm looking at you now. It was
Yeah,
more of a feeling and a knowing that I am in a different sort of dimension,
yeah,
consciousness only. I didn't see his face. I told it was like I just knew it was him.
yeah, you had
The
a knowingness. I
I
call
had
that
it,
a,
yeah,
yeah, call that a
yeah,
knowingness. It's the same. It's people don't know what that means. It's the same thing. Like, how do I know I'm sitting talking to you on Zoom in front of my laptop? I just know. I don't have to go check with my neighbors and say, "Hey, could you come over here and just, like, what am I doing right now?" No, you just know it. It's just that knowingness, right?
yeah,
But here's the thing. Goes to the point we were talking about there earlier about me. My thing is to like demystify the mystical.
yep,
I've had people say to me, well, Kel, you described this out of body experience. It's not really an out of body experience. Da, 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 da. There's gradations, and people like to make themselves sound like really important. It's like, I call it my friend George and I call it the importance of being important. Affliction. So many people are afflicted with showing how important they are. Oh, but I had this out of body. Mine was a real out of body experience, or mine was a real NDE, or whatever. There's gradations to these experiences, and our consciousness is not black and white. It is fluid. And so your experience is just as much an out-of-body experience as somebody who's walking around, like a friend of mine who had an out-of-body experience when he was 8 years old, and he was walking around. He was 6 foot tall. He could see all the books up as if he was 6 foot tall, and he's this little 8-year-old kid. So that's a more, you could say, a classic or traditional, or what most people describe as an out-of-body experience. But yours is just as much, and so is mine when I popped out and popped back in near-death experience. Like, some people say, well, that wasn't really a near-death experience because you didn't see Jesus or Buddha or Muhammad or whatever.
yeah,
Not
right.
everybody, it's not all the same. It's fluid, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And I did like what you said about demystifying the mystical because I have also touched on the fact that all of this spiritual stuff, we refer to it as supernatural, paranormal. It's not actually super or para, it's normal,
Yeah,
period, full stop.
exactly.
It's just not acknowledged in our culture the way it
It's
is in
not
other.
it's not acknowledged, and it's not common. It's not common.
Yes.
So if it was more commonplace and more acknowledged, people would probably be more comfortable with calling it normal. But I understand it's not normal in terms of commonplace, but it's natural. So to me, that's a word you really cannot debate, because, I suppose you could debate anything, but it's less debatable than the normal. Okay, yeah, okay, it's not normal, but it's natural. It's natural. It inherently, anybody can experience it. It doesn't matter what your religion, your culture is, whether you meditate, don't meditate, whether you believe in any of this stuff or not. Look, I started having the past life memory stuff. I didn't believe in reincarnation. I used to go hear people on these meditation retreats talking about it. I go, okay, I'm going over here and talk to these
Yeah.
people instead. You
Right.
know?
And actually, I was going to go somewhere else, but now you just kind of took me in a new direction. When you had these past life memories,
Yeah.
did they sort of come to you as if you were remembering something that happened a few years ago? Is that how did you know? How did you, Kelvin, receive the information or perceive it and
It
know that
has
that's what it was?
it's happened so many different ways. There's no one answer to your question. So it's
Yeah.
happened so many different ways. Actually, I'm finishing writing my third book right now, which is all about what we're talking about,
Oh,
what you
awesome.
just asked me about. I talk about how each one, I have about 20, a couple of dozen memories that go back about 6,000 years so far. And a couple of dozen lifetimes. I have thousands of memories, but I have a couple of dozen lifetimes worth of memories, and some of them just a little smattering, and some I have lifetimes I have much more clarity. Others not as much. it varies. It's like anything in life. How much do you remember about this grade of elementary school that you were in, and how much do you remember of that month of that grade, or how, well, yeah, it varies. It's no different. But I'm writing a book about how these unfolded, and details about each one that I remember and so forth from a teaching standpoint. But it really varied. I mean, the very first one, to answer your question about the very first one, I didn't even know had anything to do with past lives. Because remember, I didn't believe in past lives. I didn't believe in reincarnation. I just thought it was people fantasizing, having very, what do you call it? Colorful imaginations. Um, but what I had a dream is what happened. But I'd had lots of dreams, and I have very clear memory of my dreams, and I've had that since I was a little kid. Um, so that wasn't unusual. So by the time I had this experience, I was, what is I, 26 years old. I had this really powerful dream. So I'm 26 years old. I've been remembering my dreams for 25 of those, 24 of those years, telling them my parents and stuff. Like, okay, big deal. No, it wasn't a big deal. But it was very, very powerful, and it was very emotionally distressing. And so it left a mark in my, it left an impression in my mind, so does in my consciousness. It was one of those things that you don't forget, kind of a thing. And 6 or 8 months later, I was on another meditation retreat. Back then, I used to go on them frequently, and this one, I was on one previous year for 6 months, all day, every day, meditating in Switzerland. And then this one, after the dream, this particular dream was 2 months long. So I was with my buddy George, and we actually planned to be together on that meditation retreat. And we were in a hotel with about 75 other guys outside Interlaken in Switzerland. And we were out for a walk, and I started to tell him my dream. And I said, George, I had this really weird dream, man, really upsetting, about 6 or 8 months ago. And that's all I told him. And he just finished the dream for me. He just told me, he said, this is what you were wearing. You were in the ditch on the side of the road. You were crying. You were there all night. I said, what the heck? How did you know this? And, my heart stopped. I got like, like Mike Myers in Saturday Night Live, he gets verklempt, like what? And and he said, yeah, I found you there. What you found? He said, I found you there 2,000 years ago. And then he told me, he said, well, he asked me, he said, you've been in these group meditations in our hotel for the last 2-3 weeks or whatever it was. It was near the beginning of this 2 month course, maybe 2 or 3 weeks in or something. Every day we'd meditate in our rooms, and then we'd have group meditations twice a day in this big, foam covered floor of the dining room. There'd be 75 of us in there meditating together. And he said, you've been flipping over on your back, saying you're getting crucified upside down, And he said, you don't know what that's about? And I said, no. And so then he told me. So that's when my memory started opening up. And so that was 1977.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. I would love to hear your thoughts on reincarnation because I've heard different people speak about it, and this is sort of what I was just listening to an interview with, is it pronounced Matthias De Stefano? It was talking, he remembers all of his past lives, even as other organisms or on different planets and anyway, he was talking about reincarnation and the concept, which I've understand that on the other side, which is actually not on the other side, it's just sort of in another dimension. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. That there's no time, there's no linear time. Therefore, these lives are all happening at the same time, essentially. What do you think about what's your take on that?
That's a misunderstanding. So I don't know him at all, so I'm not saying this about him
Yeah.
personally, but that's a misunderstanding because people don't understand what time is. Time is a measurement of change. That's what time is. That's the definition of time. So people like that who say that there's no time, on the other side or whatever, in this other frequency vibratory field, it's right here, but you can't see it, so we're talking. No, it's very much like here, except time exists very differently there. So the fact that time exists differently does not mean time does not exist. Because when I go on vacation, well, not so much anymore, but when I had corporate and law firm jobs that were really intense, and I would go off on vacation to the beach in Hawaii, time flew by. It was experienced very differently by me on vacation than when I was sitting and grinding it out in my corporate office or law firm or whatever it was, right? And I'm sure most people have had that experience of time being different at different points in their life. I mean, little kids, you ask them, what's time like when, when you're in elementary school or high school or whatever, and you're waiting for the bell to ring so you can go home in 5 minutes. That last 5 minutes lasts forever. That doesn't mean that time didn't exist when you were in high school, or time didn't exist when you were in Hawaii on vacation. So that's what people are using as that. It's incorrect. So this is what I do in my teaching. The other thing that I teach is how to assess other people's thinking to see where you see cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance, for people who don't know what that means, it means thinking. Cognitive has to do with thinking. Dissonance means inconsistent, like not right, like this doesn't go with this, like this. It's like this and this. This is dissonant. It doesn't meet up, doesn't make sense. This is the way things should be, consistent and meet up and merge and kind of fit together like a puzzle piece. That's the way thinking and concepts should operate, if they are in fact, consistent and more universal. So when people say these universal, that is universally true, that there is no time on the other side, it's incorrect. They may have a very different experience of how time is measured on the other side, but time is measurement of change. And so the clear way to understand that is, does change exist on the other side or on a different planet? And it doesn't matter what the gravitational pull is on a different planet. I have lifetime on another planet too. But is time experienced differently? Absolutely, differently. But time still exists because change still exists. If change exists, it can be measured. You may measure it on a different planet, not in days, weeks, months, seconds, whatever. Doesn't matter, but it can be measured. How it's measured is irrelevant. The existence of time is based on whether change exists. Okay? Because if change exists, you can measure it whatever way you want. Metric, or inches, non-metric. Here on planet Earth, we measure it in different ways. That doesn't mean that in a metric company, metric country, time doesn't exist. No, it's just change still exists in England, even though they use the metric system, okay? So change exists on the other side. Otherwise, who are you talking to if you're a medium or if you're psychic and having an experience with it? You're not talking to cosmic soup. That change, if individuality exists on the other side, which it does, I think even that person who you're quoting would maintain that his existence has continued through all of his lifetimes, whether he's on this side or the other side. That means his individuality has continued. If it's continued, then he has been experiencing change the whole time, and therefore it could be measured if you wanted to measure it. Therefore, it still exists. Does that make sense?
Absolutely makes sense. That's a really interesting way to put it, and I thank you for that. That's again a really new, interesting perspective. Um, so with that in mind, trying to decide what to ask first. There is, what do you think about? So when we reincarnate, do you think it's all a linear process? Like you, Kelvin, leave this body, your soul goes to the other side, and then what happens? Or in
Then I
what order?
go on and I hang out on the other side, or I don't hang out on the other side. I do whatever I want to do on the other side. I have fun, I relax, I may go to classes, I may learn, I may teach classes on the other side. I've gotten glimpses of beings on the other side taking my classes while I'm teaching them on this side. So you can do whatever you want, and you can choose to come back and
Hmm.
incarnate again if you want to. Nobody says you have to. It's not punishment. It's not because you got to go learn your lessons or because you did something bad and some karmic retribution or something. Those are all man-made concepts well, not just necessarily man-made. Some of them are angelically made concepts, but they're concepts made up by beings, by minds, to create control of people. And so I am like a free will, like do your thing person. I am not into controlling or promoting control. So I'm here to promote understanding of things so that you have the freedom to figure things out yourself without the being in other words, being unfettered by the restraints of other people's minds and thoughts and beliefs. So the reality is, from my experience, is that if time exists, then there is linear time throughout the universe is linear time. Again, people may experience it so differently that they can't get their mind around the fact that time still exists. It doesn't exist in the same way that they experience it on Earth. That's the accurate way of saying it. Time doesn't exist in the same way it existed when I was a biological body. Okay, that's the part they're leaving out, right?
Yeah.
It's really important. But it's an important part that to recognize that you're leaving that out. Because I tell my students I teach a 6-part afterlife series. I got another one starting in next week, actually, next Sunday, so or this Sunday, this coming Sunday. But I tell them, I say, look, I understand how this concept of no linear time and you can be in two places at once because somebody has an NDE and others, because you're on the other side. And what are you on the other side? You're not a biological body, obviously, that has died. All right. You are energy. Your mind, your consciousness is energy. What can we use to give an analogy, not even an analogy, but actually a direct parallel to what we're on the other side is light. We are light beings. Can we measure light in this side, in this physical, in this dimension that we're living in here on planet Earth, and in Venus, Mars, this planet, this side of the Milky Way, it's over at galaxy, etc.? Yes. And the speed of light, I looked it up, 696 million, maybe it's 694 million miles per hour, but I rounded off to 700. It's close enough. 700 million miles per hour. That's incredibly fast. That's the speed of light. Right now, I have a light here in front of me. I have a ring light. It's going 700 million miles per hour.
Yeah.
It's like, hello, that's around the fattest part of planet Earth 8 times in 1 second. That means 1/8 of a second, you get around planet Earth, 700 million miles per hour. So let's just say you're on the other side and somebody says, I'm going to take you on a tour of this part of the galaxy and we're going to go see, or they're probably, maybe they do that, but more likely they're going to take you on a tour of your living family on planet Earth. And you're going to go from here to there, from Tokyo to Paris in it's either 1/32nd or 1/64th of a second. Either way, it's stupid fast, okay? Now, when your mind, who's just come from planet Earth experience of time, experiences 1/64th of a second, you can't even experience 1/64th of a second in terms of actual human experience.
And perception. Yeah.
Perception, so that's where you get these ideas from angels and humans that you can be in multiple places at the same time. It seems that way. If you can travel if you can be whatever it is, let's say it's 8 to 10,000 miles from Tokyo to Paris, something like that, in a 64th of a second, yeah, it does seem like you can be in a lot of places at once.
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask you is I'm a medium as well. I know that you receive information from your guides, from loved ones, from friends, loved ones. And that is often something people ask me is, well, how can, if you're reading me, let's just say that there are two mediums reading two family members and it's the same spirit and they're still getting information from them
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I've always said, which is now I may change this, but I'm like, they're like Santa Claus. They can be in all the places at once. But I like the way that
Yeah,
you
now
said
now
that.
you actually have a rational way to explain it to people, because it's completely rational. The speed of light we know is 694 million miles per hour. Now, I don't know how fast you can go on the other side, but my experience having visits and this and that, and like your example, is that beings on the other side could travel really, really fast. Now, maybe you got the slow energy body on the other side, and excuse me, you only can go half the speed of light. Oh, excuse me, 350 million miles per hour. Okay, fine. It's still like stupid fast. You know what I mean? It doesn't
Right.
matter what the number is. It's fast, and it's a blur to a human Earth mind.
Yeah. And then how is it that our human minds at the sort of dense speed that we're operating on can perceive these messages or these impressions, this telepathic communication, I'll say. And I know you've also said that you sometimes can actually see spirit, if correct me if I'm wrong. And I don't, I just receive information telepathically as
Yeah,
my own thought. Yeah.
most of mine is like yours.
Yeah.
Have I ever seen or have ever felt a physical presence in me or near me or whatever, or visually seen? Yes, I have a number of times, but most of the time it's like you, it's more telepathic, etc. Uh, but how can we do that? Any mind can do that. I maintain that every mind has the natural innate ability.
Hmm.
Whether or not they can exercise that, that's different story. But innately within every consciousness, whether it's a consciousness who's disincarnate, say not incarnated, which is how I refer to angels as never having been incarnated. Is the way that's the way people use the word angel in so many different ways. That's how I use it. But or whether you're incarnated like you are and I are right now on 2023 January on planet Earth. It doesn't matter. The consciousness has the ability to in a sense transverse the veil between this side and the other side whenever we want to.
Yeah.
And to me, it's pretty, it's like if I want it to be, I don't, I spend like all my time, most of my time, I'm focused on being in physical world. But if I want it to be, I can walk back and forth, kind of at will now. But it's like, yeah, it's not, but I don't want to, because if I did want to do that, why am I here in the first
But
place?
yeah.
But a lot of people like, well, if I could do that, I'd be hanging on the. That's because they're miserable on this side. I've worked out a lot of my misery, and I say that seriously but jokingly, but I mean that. I mean, I haven't. My life has not been bliss the whole time I've been on planet Earth. I've had all kinds of challenges in my life, just like everybody else has. But I've worked through it, and I enjoy being here, and I'm immersed in the present.
Yeah, me too. I really enjoy being here a lot, and I'm excited to see what every day brings. So there is that thing, and yet I'm newer to this. As you said, we all have the capability, and I've heard it said in terms of becoming a medium, whether it's professional or otherwise, but that yeah, not everyone can learn to play piano, but can everyone learn to, unless they don't have hands, but like, oh, but can everybody, and they could probably use their feet, but can everybody be Chopin? No. Some people just have a more innate ability. But with me,
Sure,
I had to learn it, but I
sure.
already had it.
Yeah.
So yeah, speak to that. I'd love to hear what you
Well, there's definitely that. People have different, I would say, skill sets.
yeah.
People have different skill sets, and they have different likes and dislikes and different tendencies in their personalities. So this is another part of my book that I'm writing, my past lives. I'm actually writing the chapter now on personalities that I've noticed have continued over the last 6,000 years, that my personality, the continuation. So we are all different personalities, and there's a beauty to that, in my opinion. So, and what comes along with that is tendencies and abilities and skill sets and so forth that are different. And I don't, some, other people have skill sets and tendencies and capabilities that I don't have. And so it is what it is. And to me, it's about enjoying each other's company, and to some extent interacting with each other, those of whom where we go, oh, there's a synergistic relationship. Oh, you can do all this amazing stuff that I can't do. Let's do this together, that kind of stuff. So it's not a bad thing, is my point. So I say that why? Because in the spiritual communities, there's so much of this, what I referred to earlier, this concept, this it's an in my opinion an undesirable trait of the importance of being important. It's like, oh, I want to be more important to you. My level of consciousness is higher than yours. Look at me, I can communicate with disincarnate beings or my dead grandmother, and you can't. And it's like, and whether somebody says that or not, there's a lot of that going on between the ears, so to figuratively speaking, in their minds, and it's like, yeah, no, my NDE is a real NDE. No, she kind of sort of had an NDE. No, it's like life is fluid. This kind of tribalism in the spiritual community, we see it, rampant in politics worldwide, but it's equally rampant in the spiritual communities. And I am a debunker and I'm a caller out of that. It's like, no, it's not good. It's not healthy. Saying that because, you went down, you took this many levels in this class, who cares? Who are you and how well do you know who you are? It doesn't matter if you believe anything I say about any of my past lives. You may think that you were somebody who I say I remember I was. Does it matter? No, it doesn't matter to me. It might matter to whoever's saying that to me. It doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is, what have we each taken from that experience, however we want to interpret it, and how has that helped us grow as a soul? Because I think we're on an eternal journey. Each of us is on an eternal journey of growth. Eternal means no beginning, no end. And so that's the way I choose to look at things.
Right. But I was Thomas Edison. You can't be Thomas Edison. We
Exactly.
can we can't be both
Exactly.
be him. So I with all of this, there's so much more I want to ask, but I do want to talk before I forget about overcoming the fear of death, because really that's one of my main motivations for presenting this information to people, because I do know people that are terrified of death, and I believe I always was for a lot of my life. I have severe anxiety, which is now really calmed down with a lot of this stuff, because I'm like, well, the worst thing that can happen is that you die, and that's a beautiful thing. It's not actually the worst thing that can happen. That's my point. Death is not actually the worst thing that can happen to you. And so, what I really appreciated, having only read half of it so far, is your discussion about how a lot of people try to shield not just children, but one another from the concept of let's not talk about it. And I just want to say two things, and then I want you to share, because I think this is so important.
Mm.
One is that I remember when my last relationship, my grandmother was dying. She had pulmonary fibrosis. I talked to her about it all the time, and I would say, "Are you afraid? Do you want me to be there when you die? Do you want me to be in the room when you die?" We talked about it a lot. What are your spiritual beliefs? And my boyfriend at the time, we're great friends. This is not a slamming him. We just have very different life approaches, which is why we're not together anymore. But he said, "Why would you talk to your grandmother about that? That's so morbid."
Mm.
And I said, "Because how do you think she feels? She's going through it and no one wants to talk about it." Um, it's and also to help comfort her and know that, like, I see what's happening here. We're not going to shove it under the rug. And
Right.
another thing is that one of my best friends just passed away in March. His
Mhm.
mom calls me all the time and we talk for hours and hours. She said nobody will talk about him. Not her,
Wow.
not her husband, not his brother. She said, "I feel I don't." So she said, "I'm sorry if I talk about him for hours." I said, "No, I want to talk about him for hours."
It's
But
so
she said,
sad.
"Yeah, it's so sad and it's unhealthy, I think." So I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
Well, yeah, starting on your last sentence, it's so sad. And yes, it is so unhealthy. It's culturally unhealthy worldwide. It's not just in the United States. I help people in 60 countries so far. So I'm up to 60 countries helping people on Zoom or WhatsApp or Facebook, phone or whatever, people will find a free way to get in touch with me. And I do free sessions with people, by the way, a free initial session with anybody in the world. But it's worldwide. It's a problem. It's the elephant in the room that I talk about in the book, right? I mean, it's the elephant in the room. Talking to was it your grandmother you said?
My grandmother.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, talk about the elephant in the room, because hello, you think they're not thinking about it when
Yeah.
they're in their last weeks and months of life, and they know that because the doctors have pretty much told them that, or their body is telling them that. Of course it's in their consciousness, and to not talk about it is almost a cruelty to me. To me, it's a gift of love to talk about it with her. That's the thing. It's the exact opposite of what, again, I'm not here to slam your boyfriend, but I mean,
No, I know me.
people like that. But people like that, seriously, it's like, they just, it's just, I'm not slamming them either. I mean, but people like that, I understand why, though. They do it because they don't want to face it themselves. And so it scares them and triggers them. So it's completely understandable. It doesn't make me angry. I understand why. It's explainable, but it's not healthy. And so that's why part of my work is to encourage people, as you said, to talk more openly about this and explore these little, what may seem to be a little bit thorny topics. But once you start talking to people, like when I was in my third year of law school, my mom died, and that's what really started getting me talking about or thinking about death and dying, because I really hadn't thought that much about it before that. My grandfather had died. I had an uncle who had died, and so forth. And I loved them and so forth. But my mom, are you serious? We were very tight, very
Yeah.
close. My mom, and I get emotional even now just saying it. It's like, it's so many years ago, and yet, somebody, I was walking down the hallway or something in at law school, and somebody said, "Hey, Kel, how you doing?" I said, "I'm okay, but my mom died." Yeah, I don't know why I blurted it out. I just said, my mom died." And they said, "Whoa, really? Are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, I think I'm okay." I wasn't okay, but I said, "Yeah."
Yeah.
And then then that self-disclosure opened them up, though.
Yeah.
That's what I encourage people to do. You got to find what's comfortable. I'm not saying you got to go right there if you had a loved one who just died, but whatever was within your comfort zone, to talk about it with other people. And you'll be surprised. I mean, it opened my friend up, and he's talking about it, one of his relatives who died, et cetera, et cetera. And then people just started calling me to talk about stuff like that, you know?
Yeah. And that's the real stuff. And that's why, and as it's someone who's been a childcare provider, I've been in babysitting and then also a nanny because I'm an actor, of course. That's been my sort of side job and dealing. I've always taken care of babies and toddlers. And yes, there's some developmental things like a 2-year-old isn't going to really understand the concept. However, I still encourage speaking about it and not making up euphemisms because I think it's important for them to understand that death is part of life and to show your feelings and emotions about it. Show that it's sad. Don't pretend you're not sad, but
Right.
also take the fear out of it by making it sort of, I mean, if you can, I know it's hard if you're afraid of it to impart that, but we want to raise children who grow up to be adults that are not living in constant terror about all the things that could go wrong and what if I die, and um, because we're probably gonna feel that anyway.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm not afraid of death, but I love my life, and I love who I am, and I love the people I'm with, and so, yes, I'm attached, but I'm not afraid of what is going to happen once I take that plunge. Once I
Right.
step over the cliff, I know I'll be fine.
Right.
So, yeah,
Right.
especially with children.
Yeah. My daughter was 5 years old when my dad died, and he died in our house, in our living room. We had a hospice nurse there for the last, I can't remember, 36 hours, something like that. She literally moved into our living room where my dad was sitting, sleeping the whole time. I mean, we had a hospital bed in another room. He didn't want to go. So he just sat in a comfortable chair in the living room for the last 36 hours when we moved him there from his condo down the street here in Torrance to, our house where we were living in Mar Vista. And my daughter was 5, and our son was what, 10 years old at the time? Yeah. And so, yeah, I said to my wife, I said, "We should wake up the kids." She said, "Yeah, let's wake the kids up." So we woke the kids up at 1:45 in the morning so they could see grandpa dead. And they, and we brought them in, my sister and my brothers and their spouses were there, et cetera, et cetera. And we got my dad into the hospital bed and waited for the people to come to take his body away and so forth. But my children were there the whole time. And then we cremated him downtown at some place downtown LA. We all met down there, and my kids actually, they literally pushed this cardboard box into the oven. Yeah.
Yeah, that's part of yeah. And have they I'm sure you've spoken with them about this at some point in their lives, but have they ever said anything about that specifically, about what their memories were or how it informed their perception of death? I know they already had you as a father, so
Right.
they were probably pretty used to
Yeah,
this kind
yeah,
of
it's
discussion.
interesting. It's interesting you asked that. I need to ask them. I'll ask them that question.
Yeah,
They'll watch this podcast interview with you.
yeah,
I'll ask them specifically that because about that event and so forth. Going to the chapel, which at the crematorium there was a chapel, small chapel, and then you see the deceased and so forth. They're literally in a cardboard casket, I guess. It's really a cardboard box, right? And then right next to now, I'm guessing that probably most families just leave and they go outside, and then the people
yeah.
come take. But we said, no, we'll help you, the workers. And right on the other side of the door of the chapel, inside door, it's a hallway, and literally the furnace is right there, whatever they call it, the oven or whatever it is. And then my kids pushed him in on the rollers. So they literally saw, and they would see him come and visit us and so forth over the months. For about a year before he died, he'd come visit us and so forth, and fall asleep more and more at the table, et cetera, over dinner because of the pain medications he was under and so forth and so on. But the kids are very normal and natural about death and dying, and they both have visitations from dead loved ones, including my father and my mother.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's really wonderful. Do you know if your here's my question. Do you know your abilities, and I say abilities because we all have them, but the fact that you were so early on conscious of spirit, whether you knew that's what it was or not, do you think that's something that you inherited from family, or is it because of all the near-death experiencers I've interviewed, I would say at least half, um, had, prior understanding, like, when they were kids, they would see spirit or they would have communications from spirit, um, and I don't and I've had several theories. One is a lot of them had near-death experiences just at birth or shortly thereafter where they popped out of their body, which then allowed them to have this closer connection to the other side. And then later in life, they were given another out of body experience to say, okay, let's continue this journey. But do you have any idea about why you personally were born this way or lived this way as a
I think,
child and beyond?
yeah. Well, what I can say is, for me, it's been something that I've um, had flirtations with for thousands of years, long
Yeah.
before this lifetime. So, and did I choose to come into this particular family with my mom and dad for some specific reasons? I think I did. I
Hmm.
think my mom in particular was the draw to me in this family. Um, is it do I think it's a DNA gene related thing? No, that's physical.
Hmm.
These are consciousness issues. These are mental. This is mental energy. This is whatever you want to call that, energetic, whatever. It's not physical, biological DNA. Um, I have a sister and two brothers, and they're not. I mean, I'm very different from them. I mean, I'm not. It's not better or worse. It's just different.
Hmm.
We're all different. We're different from each other. They're better than I am in a lot of other different ways.
Yeah.
It's not the DNA. it's their DNA, but it's not the DNA that was necessarily passed down because of my mom or the grandparents or this and that. Therefore, now you're psychic because you come from a long lineage. That's the way it to me, that's kind of like a reverse engineering way of looking at it. It's interesting that that may have been the case, but that's not the reason why
Right.
you are. The reason why you are is because of what you've done because you haven't been with those same people forever in other lifetimes. There's some of
Right.
these other people you've been with other people. So where does that come? It's like, so the DNA genes thing is just biological. It's a kind of a traditional scientific way of looking at things for people who don't believe in, typically, who don't believe in reincarnation, who are still invested without them maybe even knowing it in the science belief, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, it's more individual. It's consciousness related, and it's consciousness related to yourself. To finish that, people will say, but wait a minute, my grandmother and my grandmother's grandmother was psychic or a shaman or this or that or whatever. And then that may be true, but that could easily be explained by you guys wanting to get together and creating a soul plan over several generations to get together and be in family again. But that
Right.
doesn't, but see, that to me makes sense in the scheme of things of how souls can make choices and be with different families at different times, as opposed to it was a biological thing that was passed down from gene to gene, from generation to my great grandmother, grandmother, and my mother and me, that kind of thing. Anyway,
Yeah, I always thought of it this way is, and I'd love to hear if you have thoughts on this, that they've done brain scans on mediums and they often find that either they have had their brain looks like either they have trauma, so their brains develop differently in the sense that their amygdala might be a different size, right? Or their brain waves are just always in a theta state. Like the Long Island medium, they did a brain scan and they said, for as high strung as she is, her brain is always in a meditative state. So you could argue, and this has been always my theory, is the reason why like Matt Fraser, the medium's mom is also a medium, is partly it's also like this is your antenna. Like the brain is the antenna that allows us to perceive. And so I think there are some brains that are just wired a little bit different, a little bit differently, whether it's right brain or left brain. And in that sense, you might actually be able to inherit the gene for being more sensitive to the unseen. What do you think about that?
I think that's more reverse engineering. That's
Yeah.
my opinion. I think
Yeah.
it's more that individual, and then the science looks at it and says, "See, look at this brain and this brain.
Right.
That's the reason why." No, that may just be coincidental and a symptom of, and
Hmm.
but it also could be causative because see, they're always trying to make it. It's causation, right? A caused B. Well, no, B actually could have caused A, and now you look at it and you go, oh, but A and B, so it makes more sense to us scientifically that A caused B. So that's the multiple choice answer we're going to pick
Yeah.
instead of the B to A because it doesn't fit with science. So but the other thing is the just the exposure of the two people you talk about, the mother and the son being together, that could positively her exposing him to an
Hmm.
open receptivity, and her own energy itself could actually have a causative effect, or not causative, but an influence on his ability to open up that was already inherently there and always inherently there because of all the previous work that he did with himself. And so people
Right.
will extrapolate from that and say, see, that's proof of her DNA and his DNA or whatever. You know what I mean?
I
But
do.
but influencing another does not mean you created them.
Absolutely. I was going to say too, on that note, that I believe there's a reason why there are a lot of Native American people who will who are mediums, or because it's in their culture. So it's not so much that they are the chosen ones, it's that they've been open to it since birth. So they haven't shut that part of themselves down. They're willing to receive and they expect to receive. So they do.
Well, the other obvious reason, completely rational in terms of reincarnation, is They were a Lakota in the 1800s, and they chose to come back again into that particular Lakota nation, and they were already open to it then. They'd been developing their shamanistic skills then, and now they're taking them now, and they just happen to be in the Lakota nation again because they're familiar with it and they're comfortable with it and they loved it and they missed it, so they come back again into it. And then somebody looks at it and says, see, without knowing the history, somebody looks at it and says, see, it's because of their culture.
Right.
That's why they're a shaman, because of where they live now. Well, yeah, sort of, kind of, but it's because even before then, it was their culture and they were a shaman then. So who knows?
Yeah, I know. I love your perspective on it sort of being reverse engineering. It's like what came first, the chicken or the egg? It's
Yeah, and the
yeah,
bottom line, it doesn't really
it
matter.
doesn't matter.
It
Yeah, it's
doesn't
all just
really matter. But I use these as examples. To me, the reason I go through these mental exercises with my students, and everybody who's listening is a student of mine right now, that's
yeah.
essentially, is to show people how to analyze stuff from different angles, and don't just buy what's being sold to you at the end of the supermarket aisle.
Mhm.
Go
Right.
look at what's else on the other end of the supermarket aisle, and then compare, like, what is this? How's that with it? We need to be a little bit more discerning in how we think. And so that's why I use these as teaching examples, so to speak, to just, oh, I didn't think about it that way. That's interesting. Maybe I can think about this other subject differently, etc. Because to me, that's where suffering exists, is not thinking things through clearly and creating a lot of cognitive dissonance, and way down here in the bottom of the V, so to speak. And then energetically, your thought, your incorrect thinking down here creates beliefs that are incorrect, and then that creates more thoughts up here, and then behavior that's incorrect, et cetera, based on some misinformed or misunderstanding way down at the bottom of the V, manifests in our behavior as something that's really messed up, and it can cause us suffering. So the more clarity of our thinking, to me, the less suffering.
Yep. And that's why I love doing this podcast, because I learn something. It doesn't mean I learn as if, oh, well, that's the truth. It opens me up to other perspectives, and it helps me to form my own beliefs. And it's always changing. It's always changing. In fact, I had a woman on recently who's a Christian, and she wrote to me and said, but I'm a Christian and it doesn't seem like that's the kind of people that you interview. I said, I'm open to hearing. It's your truth and your story. Tell it.
Right.
I'm open to anything. Tell me what your experience is. It helps kind of put it all together, I
Yes.
think.
Yes.
And so before we go, I would like to just touch on your book, Marcus Aurelius Updated, because
Mm.
I'd love for you to talk about it the way that you do. Like, what's the format of it? What because I find it's great. It's little nuggets. It's like
Yeah. It's the
n-
purple one, right?
it's
Yeah.
yes, and it's
So
this isn't an insult. It's actually a compliment that it's like it could be a bathroom book in the sense of like
absolutely.
every morning or turn over and read a
Yeah.
page before you go to work, or when you're sitting on the toilet, you could just read something, and
Yeah, because some of the essays are literally that long,
which I love.
you know?
I love that.
I opened it up to "Crying is Not Weakness." So that's the title of one of the essays
Yeah.
here. So there, suffering and happiness. There's different essays in here. There's 67 essays in here that I've written over the last 8 to 10 years, something like that. Self-interest, sex and spirituality, transcending cruelty, getting beyond bullying. So they're divided into different chapters. And so there's a chapter on emotions, life principles, meditation, and the spiritual. And so these different chapters have a whole bunch of different essays under those different categories. And as you said, Shannon, they're short. There's only a page and a half. The average is like 3 pages, and we're talking 3 pages like in a book like this.
Mm-hmm.
So they're easy to read. I have a lot of my students, they have it on their end table, their nightstand, I guess,
Yep.
next to their bed. And before they go to bed at night, they'll just open up the table of contents, and they'll look at the titles. Which one attracts
Calls
them?
to me. Yeah.
Yeah, which one calls to me? And they'll read that essay before they go to sleep. And they're all uplifting essays, so it's not like there's nothing negative. They're all ending in a positive way to think about life, but a different way to think about it. And so it's kind of a nice way to go to sleep at night.
Yep.
And you kind of, in your dream state, your kind of more open dream state, your mind can kind of ruminate and digest and assimilate, the essays. So basically, it's just I wrote these essays, like I said, over the last 6, 8, 10 years, some as recently as a couple of years ago. And I never thought I was going to put them in a book. And my friend said, "Hey, why don't you put them in a book? You
What
get
were
your
you going to do with them?
I just like, I write them and their
Yeah.
ideas, and I stick them on Facebook sometimes or whatever. And then, to my, my Facebook friends to help them or whatever. So my friend said, "Hey, why don't you make a book? It's already written. You've
Yeah.
written it already." So I just put
That's
it
great. Can
together.
you just talk a little bit about Marcus Aurelius,
Yeah,
The Roman emperor?
yeah. So Marcus Aurelius was a second century Roman emperor, but primarily he viewed himself as a philosopher. He wanted to be a philosopher, but he was born into this family, one of these aristocratic, Roman families in the second century that was connected to, very connected. Let's just say politically connected. And then Hadrian, who was the Roman emperor when Marcus was born, the Roman Emperor Hadrian took a liking to him and started grooming him very young, 6 or 8 years old, started grooming him, putting him in different positions of to learn about certain traditions and so forth that a Roman emperor should know about, et cetera, et cetera. And then eventually he was what's called a praetor and a consul when he was 17, 19, 20 years old, when the law was that you had to be at least 24 years old. So the Roman emperor at the time changed the law so that Marcus could be in those roles, basically kind of running the Senate. So he was running the Senate as a teenager or in his young 20s. And then after he did that a few times, the Roman emperor changed the law back to 24. You had a minimum age 24 years old. So he was an unusual emperor in the sense that he was kind of groomed in a way to be emperor, and he was philosopher, not wanting to be an emperor. So he studied Stoicism, Greek philosophy, etc., as a young child. Didn't want to sleep in his bed. Wanted to sleep on the floor like philosophers slept. He's living in this palace, sleeping on the floor. And his mom took her some months to like, get in your bed and sleep in your bed. Wear regular clothes. You don't have to wear, gunny sacks, burlap bags, like a philosopher does, whatever. And so he became a Roman emperor, and he's considered one of the better Roman emperors, let's just say, out of the pantheon of Roman emperors there. And people loved him. He did some great things, and he's also considered a great military strategist as well. So, but this is a shout out to Marcus. This book, and many of my ideas are reflective of the way he wrote some of his ideas. So some of you people in your audience have probably heard of Marcus Aurelius's or Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And really what those are, it's a book that's out there, and there's like, I Googled it, there's like 64 different versions of it out there, translations and so forth of it. But what he never intended to write a book. It's just a collection of his self-reflections that he would write every day, or almost every day, especially when he was in between battles and so forth, out in the middle of a Germania or here or there, in Parthia, in a tent, or in a Roman fort somewhere in between battles. He would write down his ideas, And around the year 800, somebody found them. They're just all these scraps of who knows what they were written on. And then in around, I think it was around 1700 or something like that, that's when somebody published them and started calling them Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. So he never intended it to be public. It was his personal reflections on how to live life. And many of the things that he said in the second century are reflective of what I've been saying for thousands of years as well, and including this lifetime.
Yeah, I love that, and I've heard of him, I just never realized what a hippie he was, and I love that. I love that
Yeah,
basically your book just riffs on that, and riffs on some of his thoughts and kinda puts it
yeah,
into modern language, which I appreciate,
yeah.
too.
I picked out. I don't know how many, like a dozen or something like that, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then of his, I took him and I footnoted it and everything, and I copied him verbatim from one of the translations of his stuff, and then I gave my take in 21st century language on each one. Yeah,
Yeah, which I appreciate. His language is actually quite easy to understand, but it's a little bit denser just because it was another time, so it's really
sure.
you break it down in that East Coast kinda
Yeah,
modern hip way that is,
exactly.
we're talking
It's
about
like, yeah, I take it the 21st century hippie, translating the second century hippie
yes,
into the 21st century hippie language via the 60s hippie.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. Because one of the things that you talked about, with Trisha Barker in that interview, and she's a great friend of mine, is
Yeah.
about meditation and how it actually has anti-aging. I don't wanna
Yeah.
say benefits, I was gonna say
Yeah.
properties, it's, benefits, and, well, I'd love to hear
Look at me.
why.
What?
I know, so I told you, right? You look if you asked me how old you were, I'd be
Excuse me.
like, "No, no," but we talked this is why I wanna bring it up, because if you were like, "How old am I?" I'm
Well, people walk up to me all the time in it, like I don't know. They'll
yeah,
say two things to me. Okay. There's two things to me that they'll say. These random people, because I used to travel a lot for my business work and so on. And I still now, post COVID, I'm going to start traveling again, speaking. But random people, they'll come up and say, my wife and I we're looking at you,
trying to figure out
and we're trying to figure out, what are you? They always say this. They don't say what has to do with it. What are you? So it's for my friend, well, I'm human.
human,
Say
yeah,
that, what are you? And then, how old are you? That's what those are two questions I get.
right,
So
and
I always say, what do you think?
no, right, and so if I didn't know how old you are because that interview was 2 years ago, and you
Yeah,
said you were, you were almost 70, I think you said
yeah,
at that time. Did you
yeah.
say that? Um, I
Probably.
would look at you and think that you were my age, and I won't specify here, but I'm getting very close to 50. I would say that you're my age, and part of that is because you're also cool and hip and you're not like and you're active. But it's also okay, you're at least part Asian. So there's some DNA there, but that's not all it is. And I'd love to know sort of the concept behind what it is about meditating that
Yeah,
maintains your health, I would say. Not to
yeah.
be it's not about our outward appearance, but I'm not saying
Right,
if you
right, right.
meditate you're gonna look as great as Kelvin. But yeah, how does it keep
Yeah,
us
but the inner does affect the outer for sure.
it
The inside
does.
of our physical,
Yeah.
and our outer. But to segue from this to what we're talking about now, when I talk about meditations of Marcus Aurelius, or 21st century meditations on living life by me, um, that's using that other way of thinking about meditations as ideas, thoughts, ruminations, concepts. Let's
Yeah.
talk about that. Now we're talking about meditation technique and experience of turning within. Those are two different ways of looking at meditation. So, um, yeah, I've been doing this since 19 years old. I was a test subject in the first medical studies ever done in the United States on any kind of meditation, by Herb Benson, a cardiologist, Harvard Medical School professor, and in Boston. And it was published in Journal American Medical Association, Scientific American Magazine, etc. They took blood samples. So they're measuring all this blood panel and this and that, and they could see the, you could call them the markers or the signposts that this is something, this technique is something that's affecting the neurophysiology that would have a positive effect on reducing the effects of aging, because cortisol level,
Stress, yeah.
stress, lactic acid, all that stuff ages us from the inside out. It makes your heart age really fast. It makes everything, your cells, everything. Changes hormones. Hormones, are really important. If our hormones are out of balance, the chemical imbalance, the electrolytes, et cetera, is so important. Our heart operates based on electrical impulses. And if you mess up those electrical impulses, and the hormones are an integral part of that, it leads to bad health. And so I've estimated that I've meditated somewhere around 40,000 times so far in my life.
Mm.
And it absolutely has helped. There's no question. There was a study done, in terms of your specific question on aging, at Harvard Medical School in the 1990s. And the study group was people who had been meditating, doing the variation of the technique that I teach now. I've removed all the cultural and, potentially quasi-religious trappings from the TM technique that I used to teach in the 70s. I've removed all that, so that's why I can teach across so many other cultures now. And I've made the technique easier. But in the 1990s, there was a study done at Harvard Medical School, people doing this meditation technique for about 3 to 5 years. So the average was 4 years. And what they noticed was the difference between the calendar and physiologic age, 12 years. On the average, they've only been meditating for 4 years. In 4 years, twice a day, the way I teach it, 10 to 15 minutes each time, it reduced your physical age on the average by 12 years.
I was
After
gonna
4
ask,
years,
how long do we have to do it? So that's really encouraging. It's 15 to 20 minutes.
yeah, not that long.
No,
Not that long. Yeah, 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 yeah.
so that's great. Yeah, thank you for that too. I've regularly started meditating, and people always think I'm 10 years younger already, but it's because of, yes, gene. Both my parents have, I'm part Spanish. And also I didn't have kids, and also
Yeah,
I sleep a lot, and I don't drink, and I don't smoke, and all of that stuff.
yeah,
But there is
huge.
also, as somebody who suffered from severe anxiety and still has it, and I have to be on a
Yeah,
little medication just because otherwise it can spin out. I've noticed, since I've really delved into the spiritual, the meditation, the daily, I do yoga every day if I can for even just 20 minutes. I'm so calm and in the flow that, I just feel better. My cortisol isn't spiking. I no longer have adrenal fatigue, which was a constant. I was always in fight or flight,
yeah,
and it is a lot about stress and just well-being, and I highly recommend meditation. And will close because I know you actually have a client coming, in shortly. I want you to get in the zone, but share
yeah,
with us. I don't know how booked you are, but the services you're providing. I know the afterlife classes,
yeah.
just what you have coming up, what you want to promote. I
Sure,
will share it all beneath in the
sure.
description.
Yeah. So the easiest way to get in touch with me is go to kelvinchin.org. That's one of my 4 websites. I have 4 websites. You go to kelvinchin.org, or you go to any of my websites. And in the footer of any website is the hot links to the other 3. There's also a hot link to my YouTube channel as well. So you should subscribe to my YouTube channel. I have a separate website on overcoming the fear of death. I have a website on my books. And I have a website on meditation. But kelvinchin.org is the easy one to remember, because it's just my name.org. And it's all done under my through my nonprofit organizations. So the meditation class is a 4-day class. It's about a couple hours each day. And my group class, I teach group classes and private classes. And my group classes, I teach once a month, and they usually fill up a month or 2, sometimes 3 months in advance. So right now, my February class is booked, but I'm booking my March class right now. As I said earlier, I have a afterlife series, which is a 6-part series. It's a two 2 hour each class, that and every other Sunday. It starts this Sunday, January 15th, and then I rotate. This is actually the 15th time I'm doing it, the series. Um, and so I'll probably start another one in June if people miss this one. And they can see it in details of it on kelvinchin.org, that website. To go to the page, it says Afterlife series. Another thing I got going on is every 30th of the month. And by the way, I never turn anybody away for financial reasons. Never, ever. So people have financial issues, you still contact me. It doesn't matter. So, and now every 30th of the month, I'm doing a free Q&A. It's called the monthly 30th Q&A. So it's a monthly 30th Q&A because it's on the 30th of every month. So I make it easy for people to remember. Obviously, February, it'll be the last day of February. But on the 30th of every month at 12 p.m. Pacific time, 10 a.m. in Hawaii, 7 in the morning in Melbourne, Australia, do the math, 3 p.m. in East Coast time, et cetera, and in Europe and so forth. I do an open Q&A. It's an open forum. I just started doing this a couple of months ago, and people can ask anything about afterlife questions, and any of the ideas that were raised in the 30th November talk. So people should go check this out if they haven't checked it out yet. It's called 30thnovember.com. You have to put the TH in there. 30thnovember.com website has the talk given by my good friend. We've been close friends for 4,000 years. We've been close friends this lifetime since he was, I think, 18 and I was 20. We met at Dartmouth College as undergrads. And he gave the talk. He got a download from the spiritual leaders on the other side who started the Judeo-Christian, Islamic, and Vedic traditions. Right? And those of you who don't know, Vedic includes Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, and a couple others. But the main ones that people probably recognize as Hinduism and Buddhism fall under the Vedic tradition. So he got a download, and then I got a download from some of them as well, and some other people did too, and we all kind of collected the information. George got the big download, and then he gave the talk on 30th November, 8 years ago, 2014. So going forward now, starting a couple months ago, I'm doing an open Q&A with it because I get so many people asking me, sending me emails, and I'm going to just do it once a month. People bring their questions, and they just roll them out there about anything related to afterlife or this group on the other side who, spiritual leaders and so forth, and what their thinking is going forward to help move forward the needle of spirituality, we call it the spirituality needle on planet Earth.
Awesome. That sounds great. Thank you so much for giving your time and your energy. This is one of my
Absolutely.
favorite interviews. You're so interesting and such a great speaker and have so much wisdom. And thank you for the inspiration and thanks for showing up.
Yeah, great to be with you here, Shannon. Thanks for reaching out.
My pleasure.